Good morning and welcome to EFSA webinar on novel food applications. My name is Goran Kumlic. I am Communication Officer in the Front Desk and Workforce Planning Unit, and I will be moderating this webinar today. This webinar is a continuation of our webinar series organized in support to applicants and other stakeholders to help you better understand the procedures and the requirements of regulated products applications. Today, we will focus on novel food and the most common issues identified during the suitability check of novel food applications and support to applicants available. Today with us, we have participants representing food industry, laboratories, consultants, research organizations from Europe and beyond. During the registration process, we received 600 registrations. And today with us, we see 142 connected. We are still, of course, open, so then the new applicants and participants can connect at any moment. We can go to the first slide. Here, a bit of the objective of the webinar today and who is with us in the support team. So this webinar is organized to help applicants to better understand the procedure for novel food applications and to present also the support activities that we are providing in EFSA during the pre-submission phase. We will also present the most common issues identified by applicants during the suitability check for novel food applications, and this all based on our 2 years of experience with implementation of the transparency regulation so far. We will, of course, have the possibility to receive your questions and to provide answers. We will see later on how this will work either in writing or during the Q&A session. Before we start here, just to introduce the EFSA team behind this event, we will have 2 presenters, Patricia and Silvia. We will have also a number of colleagues supporting in the backstage, Federico, Irene, Ellen, Costanza, Catalina, Sara, Ilaria, Oscar, and Maya. Also with us, we have a technical support service provided by Carolina and Marina, and not to forget Margarita. And at any moment, if you would be facing any technical issues with your connection and from the user perspective, you can always contact Margarita. If we can also share the email of Margarita with participants, that would be great. Just to mention that for what concerns the questions that you are posing, they should obviously address the scope of this webinar. So what we presented as the topic, and all questions that fall out of the scope will not be responded. You will see later we have several other options for any questions that you might have, and we will provide you the contact where to address them. So we will go to the next slide to introduce the agenda and the structure of the day. We'll have 2 presenters presenting the procedure for the novel food applications and most common issues identified during the suitability check. We will then move to the question and answer part of the section, where we will be replying live on your questions received during the webinar, and also some questions that we have received also in advance during the registration phase. And you will be also able to submit your questions via the Q&A feature on the top navigation menu of your interface during the whole duration of the webinar. If we go to the next slide, just to provide some housekeeping rules before we start to make your experience better. especially for those participants who are with us for the first time. You will be automatically connected on listening only mode. The presentation window will be shown in the presentation part, and the speakers will be delivering the presentation. At the right side of your screen, you will have the Q&A box, which you can use to submit any questions related to the topic of the webinar. This webinar is also recorded, so we will post recordings after the event for possibly those who did not have opportunity to attend. A webinar is in English, and questions should also be submitted in English. If some questions, as I mentioned, remain unanswered, you can at any time contact us also via our Ask a Question service at the Connect EFSA platform. And we will also share the link. Presentations will be made available at our website also in a few days after the webinar. If you would have any technical issues, you can always refer to our colleague Margherita. So basically, with the next slide, we would start with the webinar. If we can move to the next slide. And here I would invite the first speaker, our Silvia, to present the first part of the presentation. Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Goran, and good morning, everybody. My name is Silvia Federici, and I work in the FDP unit as scientific coordinator in the team advice, where I'm responsible for the novel food area. Today, I will be presenting the novel food application procedure and the pre-submission activities. So the first aspect to clarify before starting a novel food application procedure is to understand if your product is or not a novel food. Under EU regulations, a novel food is any food that was not consumed to a significant degree within the Union prior to May 1997. So as a first step, you should first verify whether or not your product falls under the scope of the Novel Food Regulation, which is Regulation 2015-2283. You can also consult the Union list of the novel foods on the European Commission website to see whether your product is an already authorized novel food or not. If you are unsure whether your product is a novel food or not, you can contact the competent authority of the member state where you first intend to place the food on the market. Please note that EFSA is not in charge of this. If you already know, or if you receive a confirmation that your product qualifies as a novel food, then you must submit an application to the European Commission, complying with the Novel Food Regulation and with the scientific and administrative requirements of the Regulation 2017-2469. The application must be submitted through the e-submission food chain platform, ESFC. And another common question that we receive is whether there are any costs related to an application. And the response is that there are no fees for the submission or for the risk assessment of an application. The application must fulfill the data requirements described in the EFSA guidance documents that we will see in the next slides. In this slide, you can see the EFSA webpage where you can find information on the application and authorization procedure regarding novel foods. And in particular, in the section on regulations and guidance, you can find the links to the relevant regulations and guidance documents that you need to consult during the preparation of your application. And we actually advise you to consult these documents at the very early stage of your application so that you make sure that you meet all the requirements and you speed up the whole application process. We, in particular, advise you to consult these two EFSA documents, which are the administrative guidance and the scientific guidance. The administrative guidance contains a detailed description of the procedure for a novel food application, whereas the scientific guidance contains a description of data requirements for your application. Here you can see the main steps of a novel food application procedure, which are the pre-submission phase, the submission phase together with the suitability check, a risk assessment phase, and the post-adoption phase. Starting from a pre-submission phase, please know that here, at this stage you can request a general pre-submission advice, and you have to notify studies that are commissioned or carried out after March 2021. I will go back to this in the next slides more in detail. So if then we move to the submission phase and suitability check, this starts when you submit the application to the European Commission, and then the European Commission may consult EFSA for the suitability check. EFSA performs the suitability check in 30 working days. However, please know that this timeline can be extended in case EFSA requests further information. Then we move to the risk assessment phase, which starts when the European Commission validates the application. And after the validation of the application, EFSA will proactively disclose the non-confidential version of the application, which will then be subject to a possible republication in case any confidentiality claim is rejected during the confidentiality assessment. Then EFSA launches a public consultation on the non-confidential version of the application, and the risk assessment starts. EFSA performs the risk assessment in 9 months, but please be aware also in this case the timeline can be extended in case additional information is requested by EFSA. Also, this additional information will be subject to a confidentiality assessment, and the non-confidential version of this additional information will be disclosed after the adoption of the scientific output. The risk assessment ends when the EFSA panel adopts the scientific output. Then during the last phase, the post-adoption phase, this scientific output is published and is then taken into account by the European Commission to decide on the authorization of this novel food in the European market. So now we focus on one of these phases, which is the pre-submission phase, presenting the pre-submission activities that you can or must carry out at this stage. But first of all, it is important to know that in order to perform these pre-submission activities, you will need to use Connect EFSA. Connect EFSA is a dedicated IT platform for engaging with EFSA and performing different activities, including the pre-submission activities, such as notification of studies and request a general pre-submission advice, but also other activities, such as ask a question to EFSA or participate in public consultations. Regarding the pre-submission activities, there are 2 important points to be reminded here. One is to please register in advance to Connect EFSA to be ready to perform the activities. The reason why I'm saying this is because the registration will require a verification step by EFSA, and this may take a few days. The other important thing is to get familiar with the user guides on how to perform pre-submission activities, such as the user guide on pre-application ID and the user guide on notification of studies. Before starting any pre-submission activity, you must request a pre-application ID. And then from the pre-application ID, you can perform your pre-submission activities, such as notify the studies or request a general pre-submission advice, as you can see from the screenshot here. One of the pre-submission activity to be performed in Connect EFSA is the notification of studies. And here I would like to highlight that it is very important for you to understand what you have to do to comply with this obligation, because this may have consequences on your application process later on. So according to Article 32B of the General Food Law, potential applicants must notify without delay the studies carried out or commissioned to laboratories and other external testing facilities for regulatory purposes and for which EFSA may or shall be requested to provide a scientific output. Which are the obligations? So, studies must be notified before their starting date, and any delayed notification or non-notification must be justified. All notified studies must be included in the application, and the non-inclusion of notified studies also must be justified. A justification is needed for studies that have been notified and then withdrawn from the database. Please note that there will be no response from EFSA after the submission of a study notification, but the compliance with the notification of studies obligations is verified during the suitability check. In case of non-compliance with this obligation, the application is declared non-valid. If then the non-valid application is resubmitted, the suitability check will start after 6 months from the resubmission. Also, regarding notification of studies, it is important to mention the recently updated questions and answers of the EFSA practical arrangements, where some considerations were made regarding the studies to be notified, taking into account 2 years of experience with the notification of studies obligations. So what's new is that some analytical measurements should be exempted from the NOS obligations. Also, please consult the question 4 in part B of the updated Q&A. But which are the studies to be exempted from these NOS obligations? Those are analysis to assess the identity composition of a product, including the determination of its impurities and whole genome sequencing, analysis to determine physicochemical properties, and method validation studies. The updated Q&A is applicable to ongoing applications and future applications. As regards to pre-submission activities where EFSA provides support to applicants, we should mention the general pre-submission advice. So, if you have questions while preparing your application regarding not only the applicable rules, but also the content of guidance documents, you can use this service, which is non-mandatory but highly recommended so that you can have useful indications during the preparation of your application, is non-committal for the applicants nor for EFSA and its scientific panels. It's available for all kinds of applications, so new applications and application for modification can be requested at any time before sending the application. However, we advise you to send it as soon as possible so that we can provide you, we can guide you through the process. And the advice is given within 30 working days in a written form, whereas if given in a telemeeting, will be provided within 35 working days. Please be aware that only a succinct summary of the advice is published together with the non-confidential version of the application upon its validation. So you can be reassured that no confidential information that you may have shared while requesting the advice will be made public. Another type of support to applicants that EFSA provides is ask a question. So if you have any questions regarding the status of application, procedural step, administrative or scientific requirements, and IT tools, you can use this service, which is not necessarily related to an application, can be submitted at any time, not only during the pre-submission phase, and questions that are out of scope of this service are those related to the rules and content for a future application, which is already covered by the general pre-submission advice, and the questions on the risk management and interpretation of EU legislation, which will have to be addressed to Commission. As regards to the tools, we we reply normally to questions related to Connect EFSA and to ESFC, but not the technical question, for which we advise you to consult directly the European Commission. The replies through this service will be given within 15 working days. In this slide, I would like to highlight which are the initiatives for that EFSA has in place or is piloting for the small and medium enterprises. So what we have in place for Ask a Question is a fast processing. So the responses to this service will be given within 7 working days instead of 15. And what we have under piloting for the general pre-submission advice is the fast processing, where the advice will be provided within 15 working days instead of 30, and will be provided in a telemeeting instead of in writing. We really invite SMEs to take advantage of these initiatives, and in case you have any doubts on while you are preparing your application, please do not hesitate to contact us using these services. And with this, I finished my part of the presentation, and I would like to thank you all for your attention. And I give the floor now to my colleague Patricia for the next topic.
Thank you very much, Silvia. My name is Patricia Romero, and I work in the FDP unit as leader of the team handling applications, and among them the novel food applications. I will be presenting today the most common issues that we have identified while performing the suitability check of novel food applications since the start of the implementation of the transparency regulation on March 2021. We have organized the most common issues identified while performing the suitability check in 6 main topics. These main topics include missing or incomplete information that we identify in certain sections of the dossier, notification of studies, metadata of files in support of an application, issues on confidentiality and sanitization, how to reply to a request for information from EFSA, and also some administrative issues. So the first topic that we want to cover is missing or incomplete information in some sections of the dossier. The first section is the production process. So this section should include a detailed descriptions of the processes employed to produce the novel food. And sometimes what we find in the dossier is that these descriptions are not detailed enough. The information will vary depending on the class under which your novel food falls. So, for example, in case of a novel food is obtained via chemical synthesis, the applicant should provide information about the reaction sequence, any side reactions, and purification steps, while for a novel food that is produced from microorganisms, the applicant should provide detailed explanation of the culture conditions of the microorganism. All the information, all the details are included in the scientific guidance for the preparation of a novel food. Another point that is also sometimes missing is when different production processes are used, as not all of them are completely described. And also a point to remind applicants is about quality control and safety assurance, as usually the information is not included in the dossier or are not properly described. Here the applicant should provide information on HCCP, hazard analytical critical control points, good manufacturing practices, or ISA standards if followed. The next section that we want to clarify is compositional data. This section should include qualitative and quantitative data on the composition of the novel food, as well as its physicochemical, biochemical properties, and microbiological characterization. And the analytical information should be provided preferably on at least 5 batches that are representative of the novel food and that have been independently produced. And sometimes what we find in the dossier is that the number of batches analyzed is not enough. The information on batches, sometimes it does not match with the information of the certificate of analysis that the applicant is provided in the dossier, or even sometimes these certificates are not provided. So we remind the applicants that the scientific officer that is doing the suitability check will cross-check the information and will request for additional information if this information is not matching. Finally, to remind applicants that in case in-house methods are employed, they should be fully described and the results of the validation procedure should be provided, as sometimes this information is not included in the dossier. The following section that we want to clarify is about the history of use of the novel food. So, as indicated in the EFSA guidance, a literature review of human studies reporting the relevant safety outcomes should be performed. And sometimes what we see in the dossier is that the literature review is not included. Sometimes the literature review, it is provided, but what is not provided is the search strategy of the literature review. So we ask the applicant to also provide the search strategy and include details on the sources used, databases, and the terms and limits apply. The next section that we want to clarify is the proposed uses and use levels. So here, what we usually find in the dossier is that the information that is provided under this section is not matching with what was included in the cover letter and or in the section proposed entry in the union list. So here, the scientific officer, while doing the suitability check, will cross-check the information in these three different sections or documents, and a question or a clarification will be added in the request for information in case this information is not matching. Finally, on this section, on this topic, we want to clarify about quality and certification that needs to be added in the dossier. So the analysis that the applicant is perform, they should be done in a competent facility that can certify the data. So the documentation certifying the quality systems in place should be indicated, and whenever official guidelines like OECD and quality systems like GLP, GMP are applicable, the information should be included. Here, just to mention that what we find sometimes is that the GLP certifications are not provided or not signed. So we kindly ask the applicants to have this into consideration. So the next topic that we want to clarify is about the notification of studies. So first, I will add some clarifications to complement what my colleague Silvia just introduced during the first part of the presentation. So we want to stress that notification should be done before the starting date of the study. So this is important, very important. Also, that the studies commissioned or performed before the 27th of March 2021 do not need they do not require a notification. The applicant does need to notify in the NOS database. Still, this study can be used in support of an application, and the non-notification can be justified just by referring to the commission date. And then in addition, just to mention that notifications can be done even if the laboratory is not registered in Connect EFSA. Another point that is important to clarify is that one study corresponds to one notification. So here what we want to stress is that time points that are part of a study do not need to have a separate notification, as we usually find, like for example, in stability studies, that each time point is notified separately. So here, please have in mind that one study means one notification. And now I want to make a special point of attention to justifications. So an application will not be considered valid if it's not supported by studies that have not been notified in the NOS database, unless the applicant provides a valid justification for the non-notification. So it is of utmost importance that justifications are as detailed as possible. So we ask the applicants to justify, to provide all the information, all the evidences that can support the justification for non-notification, for non-inclusion, withdrawal, or a delay notification of studies, or any deviation. And here we want to share with you one practical example that we have also received as part of the question by registrants. So here, An example when an applicant is requested to provide evidence to justify the delay notification of a study due to the fact that EU was not the original market for the novel food. In this case, the proof of submission to this specific study to another jurisdiction or regulatory agency would be accepted as a valid justification. So in the next 3 slides, I will show different screenshots that have been taken from the ESFC, from the electronic submission platform, to provide some more insights on where to include the justifications linked to the notification of studies. So in this first slide, you see where new justifications for the non-inclusion of studies notify on the database, on the NOS database, or justifications for those studies that have been withdrawn. And this needs to be included in the section pre-application information. So once the applicant opens this section in the technical dossier, as you can see in the slide, the box, several boxes will be open, and here the applicant, where the red arrow is indicating justification, can add a justification for the non-inclusion of studies that were notified or justifications for studies that had been withdrawn from the NOS database. In the next slide, we will see that justifications for non-notification of studies are to be included under the metadata of a specific study. So here you can see we've chosen identity of the novel food, where we have a file already included, and here is where the justification for the non-notification of the study should be submitted. Likewise, in the next slide, for the justification for delay notification of a study should also be submitted under the metadata. In this case, applicants will have to reply to the question, have you notified the study before the starting date? And then when saying no, the applicant can include the justification for the delay notification of the study. So finally, in the next slide, we have listed some examples of justifications that are not accepted by EFSA. First case, EFSA is not accepting a justification by saying that the studies were not notified or notified with delay due to lack of knowledge of applicable NOS requirement, the notification of study obligation requirements, as the absence of knowledge does not constitute a valid justification for the non-notification of the delay notifications of a study. Likewise, EFSA will not accept the justification that the studies are not notified or notified with delay because they were performed after a request for information from the European Commission or from EFSA, as the obligation to submit studies to the NOS database applies also to those studies performed by the applicant after the submission of an application, even if requested by EFSA in reply to a request for information. Another justification not accepted is just self-declaration for non-notification or notification with delay of a study, as EU was initially not considered as a potential market. Here, as I mentioned before, additional supporting evidence should be provided in order to EFSA to accept this justification. As I mentioned, just the proof of submission of the specific study to another regulatory agency would be accepted. Finally, studies not notified or notified with delay as initially performed for research purposes only when conducted according to OECD test guidelines and or TLP will not be accepted. Finally, it is important to remind applicants that in case an application is declared not valid due to the non-compliance with the notification of studies obligation, the applicant has to resubmit a new application in ESFC, in the electronic submission system, as soon as all issues have been solved, providing the dossier question number of the previous application declared non-valid, as the 6 months penalty starts from the moment of the resubmission of the new application and not from the moment of the declaration of the non-validity. So we move now to the next topic, and this topic is about the information to be provided under files metadata. In the first point, we will talk about how to indicate that information is publicly available or not, information as the document type, and study identification. So in the next screen, in the next slide, you will see this screenshot taken from the electronic submission system where the applicant have to include information about the public availability of the specific study. So the applicant should tick yes, as we see in the next slide. So the applicant should tick yes for all published documents that are publicly available reports, like publicly available reports, bibliographic references, and no when a document is not published, is not part of the public domain. But then the applicant will choose from yes, IPR own acquire when the applicant has the rights to disseminate the content. IPR stands for intellectual property rights. So here the applicant should tick yes if they have the rights to disseminate the content. And in this case, the applicant should include a full text copy that will be made available in OpenEFSA after the validation of the dossier. While the applicant should tick yes, IPR not own when the applicant does not have the rights to disseminate the content. In this case, the applicant should include a full text copy that will be used for the assessment purpose only, and should include the bibliographic citation in the free text box, and this is what will be made available in OpenEFSA after the validation. So here we really want to stress this issue here. So please, if dossiers are publicly available, the applicant should tick yes and should check if they have the rights to disseminate the content or not. So if we move to the next slide, here just want to mention another point where we also see sometimes some discrepancies that need to be clarified via a request for information. So applicants should include the correct document type of the document that they are submitting to EFSA. So here in the red rectangle is where to include this information. And once you tick on this box, there is a drop-down list that will be displayed, as we show in the next slide, where the applicant will can choose from 18 different document types. And here we ask the applicant to choose the one that fits the better with the content of the document. And finally, as part of the metadata, applicants will also need to add some additional information in case of a study report is submitted. Here, information about, of course, the title, the author, the study completion date, the study quality type. This information should be included. And this information will be cross-checked with the actual study and information in the NOS database. So the scientific officer doing the completeness check will check this information and will request additional clarification via a request for information in case this information is not matching. So now we move to the next point that is about confidentiality and sanitization. And here I want to stop for a few seconds to stress the fact that confidentiality and sanitization issues are identified in every application that we receive in EFSA, and even sometimes on the documents that then are received after a request for information. So we ask applicants to pay special attention when requesting confidentiality and when sanitizing personal data and confidential information in their dossier. So first, some general information for the submission of confidential information. Applicants should identify the parts on which confidentiality is requested in a clear and consistent manner. The confidential version and the public version must always be submitted and should match. Applicants should ensure that information claimed confidential in one part of the document is not visible in another part. Likewise, we ask applicants not to include watermark confidential on parts of the documents that are not claimed confidential. The document should be properly named so we can distinguish between the confidential and the non-confidential version. And we ask applicants to refer to the correct legal basis. So if the qualification is not self-evident, to justify why the element falls under that legal basis. And finally, no unfounded confidentiality requests or requests on publicly available information should be submitted. And now, here in this screenshot is just to show where in the electronic submission the applicant can claim confidentiality. So the red arrow is pointing to the 3 dots that applicant needs to tick where to add the information about the confidentiality claims. Here also the applicant, sorry, will include the non-confidential version of the document that will be made proactively available by EFSA at the moment the application is declared valid. So additional information for filling in this section can be used in the EFSA user guide on confidentiality that is available in the EFSA website. So now, as I mentioned, an important point on how to sanitize confidential information and personal data. Applicants are requested to use permanent sanitization in non-confidential versions of documents for masking the confidential information and the personal data. So the items that are deemed confidential by the applicants, but they have to be permanently masked. And technically, there are different reduction tools that can help the applicant to do this. Like in this case, we show the mark reduction or the apply reduction. Likewise, the confidential version, the items that are deemed to be confidential should be boxed or earmarked. And this can be also done by using appropriate tools using the option mark reduction. But in this case, the earmarking or boxing must not result in an irreversible reduction, and it is not meant to protect the dissemination. This is meant to help colleagues during the confidentiality assessment to identify those sections that are to be considered confidential. So summarizing in the next slide, please, just note that permanent sanitization does not mean highlighting in different colors nor masking with a white or a black box. So permanent sanitization should be used, as I have referred in the previous slide. And here, applicants should sanitize permanently confidential information, but also personal data. And with personal data, we mean names, addresses of natural persons involved in toxicological studies, and other personal data, including names, addresses, signatures of natural persons that are contained in the different documents. So now, moving to the next topic, here we want to give some clarifications on replying to requests for information to EFSA on where to include the information, how to request to have a section unlocked in electronic submission tool, and how to request an extension of deadline. So where to include the information requested by EFSA? So applicants will receive a notification via the tool, and it will be very easy identify which sections the applicant needs to complement because they will be highlighted with the red box that you can see in this slide. So the applicant should include an updated document that to submit all the responses after the request for information. And then once this document has been updated, the applicant needs to tick on the envelope at the left side of this slide. And here they will be open a text box that we can see in this slide. So we ask the applicant not to use the text box that we are showing here to provide replies to the request for information, as this information will not be a part of the dossier that will be then made publicly available after validation, and this information will not even be considered for the risk assessment. So please do not add the replies to the request of information in this text box. nor in the final box that you will see the moment that you want to complete the action for submitting the information. So please remember to update the main text, the main document of each section, including all the requested information. So in the next slide, we want to clarify how to request to have a section unlocked in ESFC in the system. So here to mention that each section of the dossier is unlocked for modification, so the applicant can modify the section only in case of a request for information is done by EFSA in that specific section. So the applicant may be one of these two situations. So the application, it is with the applicant after a request for information. So in this case, the applicant should reply to the request for information and include the sections that they need to be open. And in this case, a new request for information will follow, opening the relevant sections. While if the application is with EFSA, after EFSA has received the replies of the request for information, the applicant is requested to contact EFSA staff by email to the email that you can see in the slide, to the FDP functional mailbox, indicating the sections to be unlocked. A new request for information will follow with the relevant sections unlocked for the applicant to include the information that they wish to include. Here, we kindly ask applicants not to send an email to the SANTE technical support because they are not responsible for this issue. It's not a technical issue. It's something that FDP unit in EFSA will support you with. So in this slide, we also want to clarify to applicants how to request an extension of deadline. So extensions of deadline should be requested via the electronic submission tool. So here, you can see in the slide, applicants should go to the request for information as indicated in the red arrow. So if we move to the next slide, you will see once you choose request for information, this window will be open, and here the applicant will have the opportunity to provide a new deadline, to propose a new deadline for sending the request for information. So by ticking in this box that is indicated with the black arrow, the applicant will have access to this box, and here the applicant can enter a proposal date for sending the replies to the request for information, and also a box to provide some comments or justifications for the request of extension of deadline. So after the request made by the applicant, this information is already captured in the dossier overview, and this request reaches the European Commission, and the European Commission will be responsible for accepting or not accepting this extension of deadline. And finally, we move to some other administrative issues that we are identifying also during the suitability check of applications. And we ask applicants to put also attention into these points. So we find sometimes that the documents lack the signature or even the started date. And this information should be, so the applicant will receive a request for information to add this additional data that is missing. Also, sometimes we find that documents are submitted in languages different from English. And here we remind applicants that English is the working language in EFSA. And to facilitate the evaluation of the application, documentation should be submitted in English. In case documents are submitted in other languages different from English, EFSA may ask the applicant to translate. And this will include, this will mean that a delay in the assessment of the application might be happening. Also, as I mentioned before, it's important that the annexes are also matching the content of the annex with the document type that the applicant is choosing from the list that we already show, and also that documents that are included in the dossier are electronically searchable, as sometimes what we find is that documents are not word searchable and the information cannot be extracted. And with this, I'm finalizing my presentation, and I give the floor back to my colleague, Goran. Please, Goran.
Am I live? No.
We just need the floor back. Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers for the presentations delivered. And I would like to thank also all the participants who are posting many questions in our chat box, as well as our supporting team working hard to provide answers. We have already provided a number of answers to the written questions you have submitted. And now I would like to start the question and answer live session. We will here provide oral explanation to a number of questions that require more extensive answer. To remind that also during the registration process, we have got many questions, and thank you for that. We will first start the Q&A session answering a few of those questions received before the event, and then move to several questions that we have picked up from the audience today. So I would give the floor back to Patricia to kickstart the session with the first answer. Please, Patricia.
Thanks, Goran. So we received this question. So how is the review process organized? Can we expect multiple rounds of questions, or will all questions be addressed in a single round, unless questions arise, of course, from the answers provided? So the review process, or suitability check, as we call it, starts when an application is forwarded to EFSA by the Commission, and it is registered in our system. From this moment, the scientific officer that is doing the suitability check, the responsible for this application, has 30 working days to provide the feedback to Commission on the suitability of the data that has been included in the dossier. The scientific officer will check if the data is in accordance with the legal requirements, as NOS obligations that we have extensively talked today, and also the requirements included in the EFSA guidance. And if certain parts of the dossier are not complete, or they need additional information, the applicant will receive a request for information via the system. The applicant has then 30 days to provide the responses to the request of information, and the applicant also can ask for an extension of deadline, as we already discussed and explained. If the information that the applicant is providing is not detailed enough, this cycle could be repeated several times until the application is considered valid. In this case, it is important to mention here that after receiving a request for information and before submitting the response, the applicant can ask EFSA to organize a teleconference. And in this teleconference, that could be organized, so that will be organized with the scientific officer that is doing the suitability check. The applicant could clarify all questions that are included in the request. So back the floor to you, Goran.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for answering this one. And we move on to the second question, where I invite Ellen to take the floor. Please, Ellen.
Yes, good morning. I'm Ellen van Haver. I'm a scientific coordinator working in the advice team of the FDP unit. So I'm reading the question on the screen. Notified studies that are now exempt from notification, should they be withdrawn from Connect EFSA? Under the new interpretation, which studies should be notified? So as was already explained by my colleague Sylvia, with the updated Q&A document that was published 28th of August, some analytical measurements are exempted from study notification obligations, and more information can be found in the answer to the specific question 4 of that document. So for such analytical measurements that were previously notified, there is no need to withdraw them from the EFSA Connect platform. So once your application is submitted to EFSA, we will not check anymore the notified information related to those analyses that are now exempted from the notification of study obligations. So studies that are not exempted and that remain to be notified are, for instance, stability studies, efficacy and safety studies, including toxicity, human or animal studies, and studies to demonstrate the absence of viable cells and recombinant DNA of the microorganisms. So also when those are submitted in the form of certificates of analysis. So in case you would have doubts in whether a specific study type needs to be notified, you can use the Ask a Question tool to address your question to EFSA. So back to you, Goran.
Thanks a lot, Ellen. And we move on to the next few questions where Catalina will provide answer. I give the floor to Catalina, please.
Good morning, I'm Catalina Manier, a scientific officer in the front desk unit, working with applications during the intake phase of the life cycle of the applications. So for the first question we collected, will it be available a detailed database where all the novel food applications and dossiers are collected and freely consultable? So if we go to the next slides, I would like to show you that we have an open portal which is named Open EFSA, where you can find all the information of EFSA scientific assessment work. By using filters, as you can see on the left side in the blue box, you can search by food domains using keywords of your interest, so you can follow and find all the applications. In the next slide, I would also like to show you how you can monitor the status of your applications. You have information on the subject, some substances associated to the application, the timeline of all events and milestones during the assessment, and some supporting documentation related to the dossier. In the upper left corner, you can find the dossier link to access the full public version of the dossier once the application has been moved to the risk assessment. So to the next slide, please. When you click in that link, you will go directly landed in the dossier, in the specific dossier, where you can find general information, as you can see on the right side, and also some documents submitted in the application. These are the public version of the documents, and you will see that in the next slide, if you click in one of them, you have access to the public version. You will see that there is also a confidential version, and you can download the document that is the one redacted. Next slide, please. And here, just to show you that for some type of documents like study report, you are also having some metadata associated to the study here. The next slide, please. So the next question I will take, this was posted and we are taking it now live. It usually takes some time before an application is formally considered invalid and must be withdrawn and resubmitted. How exactly is the embargo of 6 months applied? Is the time between original application and decision on validity somehow taken into account? To reply to this question, I would like to highlight that EFSA provides its assessment on the suitability of an application to ensure that the application complies with the new provisions of the regulation of the General Food Law and with EFSA scientific requirements based on EFSA's guidance. Based on this, the European Commission decides on the validity of the application. If the European Commission considers that the application is not valid due to non-compliance with Article 32 of the General Food Law, the process is terminated, so the applicant does not need to withdraw the application. Once the process is terminated, the applicant will be informed and the applicant can resubmit the application, as my colleague Patricia explained. They need to insert a new application in the ESFC platform, and from the date it is submitted, the 6 months penalty starts. Next slide, please. So last question for me to take is, does the obligation to notify stability studies imply that those studies need to be performed by an external certified laboratory? We would like to stress that the applicant can choose whether to perform a study by an external or an in-house laboratory. In both cases, it is important that the applicant notifies the study in the EFSA database before starting date, as we have mentioned before. In addition, the applicant should check the legal requirements and the EFSA guidance documents if there are provisions for the study to be performed in accordance with certain quality standards. This might not be applicable to stability studies, but in case, for example, of toxicity studies, the study needs to be performed under GLP certified laboratories. And I give the floor back to Goran. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Catalina. Thanks to all other colleagues who provided answers. I think we have one more question for this Q&A session. This will be answered by Oscar. So I invite Oscar to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Goran. My name is Oscar Gonzalez, and currently I am task responsible for the General Presumption Advice Service and the support to small and medium-sized enterprises in advice, also in the FDP unit as my former colleagues. The question was, what advice would you offer to applicants in how to prepare a robust submission? Well, the fact that you are attending this webinar is an excellent starting point to prepare a robust application by following the indications provided in the presentations from my colleagues. However, remember that if you have difficulty fully understanding any part of the novel food administrative or scientific guidance documents, you can seek support from EFSA through the General Presumption Advice Service, even if you are still in a very early stage of the preparation of your application. For small and medium-sized enterprises, the General Presumption Advice is provided preferably in a telemeeting to give a closer support and to ensure that the applicant understands those requirements. And now I am handing the floor again to Goran. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to Oscar. And with this answer, we have reached the end of the Q&A session. And again, thanks for all participants submitting your questions during the event and also before in the registration process. Before we close the webinar today, let me provide some final practical and logistic information. Yes, here a few words about our satisfaction survey. We care a lot about your input and with the view of improving our future webinars and similar events. You will be receiving the satisfaction survey shortly in your inbox. Apart from that, it is important to mention that if any question remained unanswered, you can always refer it to the Ask a Question tool. Here you have the link to our EFSA Connect portal. The recording of the webinar will be provided in coming days, also on our website, together with the presentations delivered today. Yes, we would much appreciate the participation in the satisfaction survey. You could also express any of the topics that you would like to see addressed in future webinars. It is also needed to say that we hope that this webinar will help you to better understand the procedure and the requirements for novel food product applications. And here we can move to the next slide, please. Before we close, just a few words about our LinkedIn group, where we have established this LinkedIn group to keep you informed about information relevant for this application procedure, including the information on support materials, changes in the IT tools and platforms, or some upcoming trainings or relevant materials. You could connect and stay informed on similar informations and also exchange experience and knowledge with your peers, where we have more than 1,000 members so far. If we move to the next slide, where we have covered few useful links to remind you on the web page and other sources where you can find the relevant information. I'm now checking just the chat if there is something else to mention before we close. This is not the case. So I would like to thank you for attending this webinar today. And on behalf of EFSA team, on behalf of my colleagues, thank you again for your cooperation and engagement. Thank you for your attention and have a nice day. We can close the webinar.